Nazreen. For those of you who haven't met me already, I'm Raymond Holt from the University of Leeds. I'm was one of Nazreen's colleagues on the previous suitcase project, and I'm a member of the Include Centre that is launching today. But we are joined online by June Lowery Kingston, who is the Head of Unit Accessibility, Multilingualism and Safer Internet, and Deputy to the Director for Data at the European Commission's Director General for Communication Networks, Content and Technology, or DG Connect, as we like to call it. And she'll be presenting on United in Inclusion today. So we've got 20 minutes for the presentation, for the whole slot, so that should include questions as well. So June, if it gets to 2 here, I'm not sure where you're presenting from, then I'm afraid we will have to stop at that point. So I will quickly yield the floor and let you begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ray. So I am not an academic, as you'll be very soon aware, but I am delighted to be with you this morning. In fact, lunchtime, I suppose, afternoon now, as it is here in Luxembourg. As Ray said, I am a head of unit in DG Connect, responsible for accessibility, language technologies, and a safer internet for children, as well as the Connect Equality Coordinator. And in my free time, if I get any, I'm also a keen theatre practitioner as a writer and an actress and a producer. So the theme of today's symposium is really very close to my heart, and I warmly thank you for giving me the pleasure and the privilege of being in the launch, even if virtually. So I'm going to talk a bit about the ambitions of the EU in inclusion and accessibility, what we're doing about it, and how digital can help culture become more inclusive. As our President, Commissioner von der Leyen, has said, we seek a Europe where we are all equal with all our differences. And she herself set the goal of a union of equality just before she took office. And of course, since the digital environment nowadays is such a significant part of all our lives, we must ensure equality and non-discrimination online as well as offline. So, to my unit. We're responsible for the Web Accessibility Directive, which some of you may have heard of. It aims to ensure that the websites and mobile apps of all public sector bodies across Europe are more accessible to persons with disabilities and are based on common accessibility requirements. The Web Accessibility Directive, or as we call it, the WAD, was the first of its kind in the EU, and it was a game changer in bringing formal accessibility obligations into the digital space. And it allows persons with disability in Europe, but also those of us in Europe who gain from accessibility features, to enjoy easier access to public services, information, and tools. And under the WAD, by the end of 2021, so for the first time, the member states had to monitor their websites and mobile apps for accessibility, publish the results, and inform us about that. And over 10,000 websites and 300 mobile apps were examined in that context. And we in the Commission also had homework to do. We had to review the directive and evaluate whether it's proving effective, efficient, and coherent with other legislation. And as part of our public consultation into that, for the first time, we, the Commission, used an easy-to-read format of questionnaire in all 24 official languages. And about 80% of the respondents with disabilities chose to use that format of survey for their replies. And I very much doubt we would have heard those voices if we hadn't had the different format of survey. So from our review, I think our main takeaways are much remains to be done, but the WAD is definitely bearing fruit across the EU. Member states are taking online accessibility seriously. They've all transposed the directive into national law, and they've all introduced formal feedback and enforcement mechanisms, accessibility statements which document what is inaccessible as content, explain alternatives, and explain also the feedback and enforcement mechanisms for reporting problems and requesting inaccessible content are being put in place. Well, member states did monitor, and they have reported to us with only 1 or 2 exceptions. And basically, we have a good and a constructive exchange with the member states and between the member states through our expert group. The review has also shown us that there are still challenges, lack of accessibility skills, and people with disabilities who have the right and the tools to complain about the lack of accessibility are rarely using those options, at least so far. We do believe that while there's still progress to do, digital accessibility is slowly but surely being seen in the public sector as being essential and not just a nice to have feature. So we're heading towards inclusivity by default. And for us in the Commission, the Union's commitment to online accessibility continues with the European Accessibility Act, which enters into practical effect in 2025, not so far off nowadays. And this act builds on the WAD, but extends the scope of accessibility obligations to a range of key digital services and tools, which will affect both the public and the private sector. And going back to the public sector, under the digital decade, the Commission has set very ambitious targets for 2030, including for the digitalization of public services. So, for example, 100% of key public services to be online by 2030, 100% of citizens to have access to e-health medical records, 80% of citizens and using a digital ID. And that further digitalization should be accessible for all. And we are reviewing member states' plans for investment to try and make sure that that is the case and they are aware of those opportunities. And also the Commission is about to set up, or in the final stages of setting up, something called the Accessible EU Centre, which will be a European resource centre to increase coherence in accessibility policies and make it easier to access relevant knowledge. It will support the sharing of good practice, should inspire policy development at both national and EU level, as well as help develop tools and standards to help implement EU law. And it's in this context that I really welcome the establishment of Include, your Centre for Inclusive Studies at the University of Borås, our symposium organiser today, and that this is part of the follow-up to the Suitcase project to promote and enable research and innovation on the topics that are so important to us. This is a great example of best practice, and I'm so glad that you are ahead of us in this game. And I hope that you will also be an active contributor to this Accessible EU project when it finally takes shape. So if we look at digital and social inclusion briefly, from my work on the Better Internet for Kids Plus policy, the strategy was adopted earlier in May this year, and also my work as a quality coordinator, I see that digital exclusion really closely mirrors the structures and the dynamics of social exclusion in general. Now, technical accessibility, or the lack of it, can of course be one reason for the digital divide between those who can and those who can't access digital tools and services. Differences also obviously exist in access to connectivity, with a geographical divide, even in Europe, often between rural and urban communities. And that's something that the Commission and the Member States are seeking to overcome also as part of the digital decade. And under initiatives such as the European Pillar on Social Rights, which Nasreen mentioned, the European Child Guarantee, there are EU and Member State commitments to help vulnerable groups access digital devices or access appropriate data packages at a social cost. And in the case of children, also that children should be granted access to equipment necessary for digital education. But just as an important component, we think, is what could be called the information and communication technology usage capability, in other words, digital skills. Can people acquire the necessary digital and media competences that they need to use ICT effectively? And that in turn, whether they have the skills or not, affects the quality of use, the opportunities that are available then to people to apply these competencies in a way that add value, whether it's professionally or personally. DigiGen, a recent research project, showed that over 5% of school-aged children in Europe, not adults, just school-aged children, are currently digitally deprived, with large differences across countries. Children that cohabit with low-educated parents, in poverty or in severe material deprivation are those most affected. And adults, of course, also lack digital skills. The studies on digital participation and social exclusion highlight a significant correlation between digital exclusion and a wide range of factors associated with social exclusion, including those low levels of social participation, poverty, education, and mental health issues. And so under the Better Internet for Kids Plus strategy, we are going to focus our efforts on reaching more marginalized groups to offer them the skills and the digital savviness so that they can benefit from online opportunities safely. And the digital decade target is for 80% of the adult population to have basic digital skills by 2030. Currently, we reckon about 4 in 10 lack basic skills, so we aim to go from 60% to around 80%. And next year being designated as the European Year of Skills is an important step along that way. We really seek skills for all. So you could say that's part of our digital inclusion policy. And digital inclusion really being the effort to ensure that everyone can contribute to and benefit from the digital economy and also the digital society. And to a greater or lesser degree, I think we could say the Commission is intervening in the following areas. So accessible ICT, making ICT more accessible and encouraging design for all, supporting innovation into new methodologies and new technology. Assistive technologies, helping persons with disabilities, enable them to perform activities that they couldn't do before. And the Suitcase project was a great example of that. But really the skills and digital skills, empowering citizens to fight marginalization and social exclusion, and the social inclusion actions are a very important part of that, to increase participation rate of disadvantaged peoples, whatever their background, their participation in public, social and economic activities. And what are we doing about that in this field of digital inclusion? Well, if we turn particularly to what we're doing for persons with disabilities, even though that clearly is not the full story, as part of the Union of Equality, in March last year, 2021, the Commission adopted a new strategy, an updated strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities. It runs from 2021 to 2030. And through it, we seek to improve the lives of persons with disabilities in Europe, but also around the world. And I'm going to quote from the strategy to say, accelerated digital transformation and the green transition offer opportunities using information and communication technology, artificial intelligence and robotics to design on-site and remote services tailored to the needs of persons with disabilities. Effective use of those technologies requires the removal of accessibility barriers for persons with disabilities and investing in their digital skills, unquote. So again, we have technical barriers as well as technical opportunities and skills. And to continue, EU funding supports areas such as deinstitutionalization, socioeconomic inclusion of persons with disabilities, access to services, inclusive education and healthcare, and making cultural heritage more inclusive and ensuring accessibility. And I'll talk more about the cultural aspects later. So we have funded a wide range of projects targeting both digital accessibility and specific types of disabilities. The Suitcase project, led by the University of Boroughs, was one example, targeting the deaf-blind and looking at haptic equipment, as we saw. The Easy Reading project translated online content into very easy to read and innovative ways using images and symbols and so forth. And we have ongoing projects at the moment also looking at improving communication between deaf and hearing individuals and translating between spoken to sign language and vice versa in projects Easier and Sign On. And I would also just briefly like to mention to those gathered today that eTranslation, our own automated translation service, which covers all official languages and many others, is free to academia, SMOs, NGOs, as well as public sector bodies, along with other types of language technologies. You just need to register, and I'll put the link in the chat after I've finished speaking. And we're also developing a haptic tablet, we hope, under the project called Ability. But I think it's safe to say that in the past, where we've looked more broadly at accessive technology, in my unit at least, we are focusing our efforts on supporting the Web Accessibility Directive and implementation of web accessibility. But fortunately, others are doing more, and so we have Musit, whose scope is co-designing and developing multi-sensory representations of cultural heritage, which extend beyond the visual and the auditory senses. And I am really looking forward to seeing how this project grows. So summing up, and I am going to get to the end, Ray, I promise, I'd just like to say a word about the importance of preserving and enhancing cultural heritage using digital technologies and ensuring culture is accessible for all. Europe's cultural heritage is a huge asset. It includes natural, built, archaeological sites, museums, monuments, artworks, historic cities, the list goes on, as well as performance works, and the knowledge and practices and traditions of European citizens. And while policy in this area is primarily the responsibility of the member states and regional and local authorities, the Union is committed to safeguarding and enhancing Europe's cultural heritage through a number of policies and programs. And Europe also is a key cultural tourist destination thanks to our cultural heritage. And that also includes the performing arts and, although I'm not there to enjoy the cake, gastronomy and local gastronomic traditions. And in fact, it's estimated that cultural tourism accounts for around 40% of all EU tourism. So visitors to Europe choosing destinations based on their cultural offering. And here also the strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities makes clear commitments. Basically, the Union and the member states should facilitate access to cultural assets and participation in the arts using digital technologies and tools in parallel to or as an alternative to physical access to the cultural heritage. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm most familiar with theatre as an art form, but the following points that I've seen in my experience apply to many different forms of live performance. Because that unique experience of being in the audience of a live performance can be offered to persons with disabilities in many different ways, through performance captions or signed performance or even smart caption glasses, allowing access for those with hearing impairments, audio described performances, open theatre to those with visual impairments, and chilled performances, as they're sometimes referred to, allowing for noise and movement in the auditorium, re-entry when necessary, offering a chill space for those who have overload and need time away from the performance, can make theatre or other live art accessible to customers with a wide range of problems, from dementia to anxiety to bladder conditions, autism, learning disabilities. And that sort of setup can also be combined with a sensory adapted performance for those with sensory sensitivities, such as adjusting the lighting and the sound effects to really make the performance accessible to all. And with easy to follow advanced information about what to expect when visiting the theatre and the specific production, such as the National Theatre in London does under the heading of dementia-friendly information, venues and performing art companies can really offer the live experience to many more in the community than just providing space for wheelchair visitors, using this blend of technology, sensitivity, and an openness and a willingness to adapt. And just as recordings of live performances in cinema quality offer the experience to many who can't travel or can't afford to travel, like the Met Opera in New York, for example, so as a lot has been done also in Europe to support the digitization of libraries and archives, and not just of text, but also of objects, to create virtual tours of museums and archaeological sites. And just to mention that in 2022, so since the war started, the European Competence Centre for Cultural Heritage, some of you may know, has joined forces with multiple partners and authorities to create the SUM initiative. And SUM stands for the Save the Ukraine Monuments. So it's a project to help digitize and preserve Ukrainian cultural heritage for future generations, particularly helping with 3D digitization of monuments and artifacts. The technology offers unprecedented opportunities such as data, as we've heard, haptic data, AI, 3D, XR, to bring cultural heritage sites to life, with virtual museums offering visitors the possibility to visit artworks in context and experience objects or sites that are inaccessible to the public. And this transformation of the cultural centre is resulting in easier online access to cultural material. And we support this in particular with the Europeana project that provides digital access to European cultural heritage. And Europeana gives free access to millions of cultural heritage items from institutions all across Europe, large and small. And I'm very happy to help those of you involved in the music project, contact those responsible for Europeana or for digital cultural heritage in the Commission. And as these developments in augmented and virtual and extended reality continue, the potential for both education and culture is really exciting. The metaverse is just around the corner and it offers huge opportunities if it's designed to be accessible and inclusive from the beginning. So, to quote once again from the strategy on improving access to art and culture and recreation, leisure, sport, tourism, accessible and inclusive art and culture are essential for full participation in society. They increase well-being and give everyone, including persons with disabilities, the opportunity to develop and utilize their potential. Because it's not just about more access for all of us as consumers of culture, though that is important. Seeing those who are differently abled and hearing their stories, particularly in popular culture such as TV and films, is a powerful way to encourage inclusion. And although, for obvious reasons, I don't normally mention British examples, the BBC's inclusive pairing of couples on the primetime TV series Strictly Come Dancing has been outstanding in this respect and seems to be having a lasting legacy, judging by the huge uptake in British Sign Language classes, thanks to last year's deaf winner, Rose Ayling-Ellis. And the National Theatre's production of Mark Hammond's novel, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night, gave a powerful insight of what it means to live with autism and to live with a child with autism. And those stories need to be told. And the more diverse the tales we hear, the more chances of empathy and acceptance from those who are different. And this is something the Commission seeks support for in its strategy for persons with disabilities, greater participation in cultural life. It seeks to raise the visibility of artworks by persons with disabilities and strives to make cultural heritage and all art accessible to all, with funding from programs such as the Creative Europe programme. We address disability stereotypes, for example, in media and film, in line with the Audiovisual Media Services Directive obligations. But again, it's not just a question of avoiding stereotypes, it's about seeing positive role models, about the cultural sector offering a place to actors and artists who are differently abled, just as we hope all sectors will. And for this year's Strictly, you can probably tell I'm a fan, I really recommend watching Paralympian Ellie Simmons, who has dwarfism, and her dance partner Nikita Kuzmin. To quote Nikita, their dancing is challenging the concept of normal, but as he said, normality is whatever we make of it. And for Ellie, the public expressions of support have meant so much as she goes on a journey, not just with her dance partner, but, and I quote, the dwarfism community, the disability community, or anyone different. So, for me, I think it's clear culture is a prime sector for inclusivity. The EU puts much effort into inclusive projects. And if you're listening to me saying, but where do we find the money? Again, I'll put the link in the chat. But basically, if you Google EU funding portal, you'll find all the details there. And we are delighted in the Commission when EU funded projects have an afterlife. In this case, Suit's case has a real legacy. So we warmly welcome the Include Centre and wish it and the Muse It project great success in your ambition to bring more inclusivity for all. Thank you so much for your attention and for having me here today. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, I'm on now, a little louder than I expected. Thank you very much, June. I'm afraid we don't have any time for questions, so we will move on to the next speaker. But thank you very much, June, for that informative and very thought-provoking talk about where we're going in terms of digital accessibility. And I'm sure there will be lots of discussion and maybe potential future communications upon that. For now, I'm afraid the agenda is catching up with us, so we will move on to the next talk.